Growing up in a small town, you learn to notice things. People in our village kept to themselves, but everyone still knew everyone else's business. Our street was quiet, lined with old houses and tall trees that whispered in the wind. Our place was small with a white picket fence. Next door, though, stood a house that looked like it belonged somewhere else entirely. Bigger, newer, immaculate. That was Mr. Collins's house. He was a wealthy man who lived there with his wife, Mrs. Collins, and their 2-year-old daughter, Stacy. Mr. Collins hardly spoke to anyone and mostly kept indoors, but what everyone noticed was his obsession with his car. A sleek black sports car like the ones you see in magazines. Every weekend, without fail, he'd be outside washing, polishing, and inspecting it, treating it like some priceless treasure. He could spend hours on it, bent over every inch of metal and glass. Sometimes I'd watch from my bedroom window, wondering how a car could matter that much. Mrs. Collins was nothing like her husband. She was warm and friendly, always waving when she passed and stopping to ask about school. Sometimes she'd hand me a plate of cookies she'd baked. Stacy was a giggling little girl who loved running around their yard. The three of them together looked almost like a picture from a brochure. This perfect, tidy family in their perfect, tidy house. Then one day they were just gone. Not all of them, just Mrs. Collins and Stacy. It was as if they vanished. I remember the day the police knocked on our door asking if we'd seen them. Mr. Collins had reported them missing, saying his wife had left and taken their daughter. My parents were stunned, but we had nothing useful to tell the officers. We hadn't seen or heard anything unusual. Like most people on our street, we assumed Mrs. Collins had simply left on her own. Weeks went by, then months. No news, no sightings. The town buzzed with rumors. Some people said she'd run off with another man. Others whispered darker theories in low voices. I tried not to think about it, but every time I saw Mr. Collins in the driveway, slowly polishing that car, a cold weight settled in my chest. It felt like there was something he was trying very hard not to think about. A few months after they disappeared, my dad was in our garage working on his old truck when he glanced toward Mr. Collins's place. His garage door was half open, just enough to see inside. There, covered in a thick layer of dust, was Mrs. Collins's white Jeep. Dad called my mom and me over. We all stood there staring, the same thought pounding through our heads. If she'd left him, why was her car still here? A few days later, the Jeep was gone. We never saw it again. We guessed Mr. Collins had sold it, though he never mentioned it. After that, he changed. He stopped spending as much time outside. When he did step out, he looked jumpy, constantly scanning the street like someone might be watching him. The sports car, once gleaming, began to collect dirt. The perfect yard grew patchy and overgrown. Then, one night, everything boiled over. We were eating dinner when a loud crash sounded from his house. My dad grabbed a flashlight and told us to stay put. From the window, I watched him cross the yard and knock on Mr. Collins's door. It took a long time for the door to open. When it finally did, Mr. Collins stood there looking pale and unwell. My dad asked if everything was all right. Mr. Collins nodded quickly, saying he just dropped something. He tried to sound casual, but something about him seemed off. When Dad came back, his face was tight. He said that in the dim hallway light over Mr. Collins's shoulder, he'd seen a pot of some kind of liquid simmering on the stove. Next to it, on the counter, lay a gun. He couldn't explain it exactly, just that the combination of it all had shaken him more than it should have. After that night, Mr. Collins withdrew almost completely. The whispers around town got louder, sharper. People were sure he'd done something terrible, but there was no proof, no bodies, no evidence. Only a missing wife, a missing child, and a neighbor whose life seemed to be quietly collapsing. I started having nightmares about their house, about what could have happened behind those closed doors. Years have passed. I grew up, moved away, built a different life. But I still think about Mrs. Collins and Stacy sometimes. I replay that image of the white Jeep gathering dust and the way Mr. Collins looked at my dad that night. I'll probably never know what really happened, Maybe no one will. But sometimes, late at night, when the world is quiet and my thoughts drift back to that street, I feel the same cold shiver I felt as a kid. And I find myself hoping that, wherever they are, Mrs. Collins and Stacy are safe, far from the man who spent so many hours polishing his perfect black car. I'd been delivering food for a few months, driving all over the city until I knew most of it by heart. Nights blurred into a routine. Pick up the order, follow the GPS, drop it off, go to the next. Simple. But that night wasn't simple. It was late, past midnight, I think, when a new order came in from a part of town I didn't recognize. The GPS took me off the main roads and into an unfamiliar neighborhood where the houses were far apart and the streets twisted in confusing loops. Each turn seemed to lead into another narrow road or dead-end alley. Streetlights were scattered and weak, leaving long, uneasy stretches of darkness between them. As I drove, the map on my phone started to feel wrong. I'd follow an instruction, only to see the route suddenly recalculate, like the streets were rearranging themselves beneath my tires. The deeper I went, the worse the feeling in my gut grew. But the job was the job, and the app said I was close. Finally, the GPS announced I'd arrived. At the end of a cul-de-sac stood a tall, thin house with peeling paint and cracked windows. The yard was a jungle of weeds, the grass came up to my knees. No porch light, no car, no sign that anyone lived there. It looked abandoned. My first instinct was to back out, cancel the order, and get the hell out of there. But I thought of the customer waiting for their food. Maybe the house was just old. Maybe someone lived there who didn't care about appearances. I grabbed the bag and stepped out. The air felt heavier here, thick and unmoving. Gravel crunched under my shoes as I walked up the path. With every step, the sensation of being watched intensified, crawling up my spine like cold fingers. The front door was already ajar. It opened with a long, slow creak at the slightest push, revealing a dark hallway beyond. The interior was swallowed by shadow. My eyes couldn't adjust past a few feet. "Hello," I called, trying to keep my voice steady. No answer, just my own voice echoing faintly back. Everything in me screamed to drop the food and leave. Instead, I leaned forward, peering into the dark. That's when I heard it, a faint rustling like something dragging along the ground. It came from behind me. I turned toward the street and froze. Figures were stepping out of the darkness between houses and from around corners. They moved silently, almost gliding, their forms barely outlined by the weak porch light. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it. One of them stepped fully into view. It was a person, but their face was covered by a smooth, white mask with no features. No eyes, no mouth, just blank porcelain. The others followed, all wearing the same expressionless masks. They formed a ring around the porch, closing off any path back to my car. I tried to back away, but the railing pressed into my spine. My breaths came quick and shallow, my mind racing for some way out. One of them reached toward me. I flinched, dropping the bag. Their hand closed around my arm. Their skin was ice cold. I struggled, twisting and pulling, but they were stronger than they looked. The tighter I fought, the tighter their grip grew. None of them spoke. None of them made a sound. They dragged me inside. The door slammed shut behind us. The darkness was complete. I couldn't see a thing. I could only hear them moving around me, soft, muffled footsteps on old wood. Their hands slid over my clothes into my pockets. I felt them take my phone, my wallet, my keys. The sense of violation was as sharp as the fear. I tried to shout, but my voice came out as a strangled croak, swallowed by the blackness and the silence. My thoughts spiraled. Who were they? What did they want beyond what they were already taking? Was this going to end with more than just a robbery? Finally, they let go. I dropped to the floor, shaking, listening as their footsteps retreated down the hallway. A moment later, the hinges creaked, the door opened, closed again, and they were gone. I don't know how long I lay there, too afraid to move. Minutes, hours, time didn't feel real. Eventually, I made myself stand. My legs wobbled. I groped my way to the door, found the handle, and pushed. The night outside seemed almost bright by comparison. The cul-de-sac was empty, no masked figures, no movement. My car sat where I'd left it, untouched. It was like nothing had happened, except I was shaking, empty-handed, and my sense of safety had been ripped away. I drove out of that neighborhood as fast as I could, fighting the feeling that the streets were still trying to twist and trap me. When I finally reached familiar roads, I didn't look back. They'd taken my belongings that night, but it felt like they'd stolen something else, too. Some simple belief that the world was predictable and safe, as long as you stuck to the rules. Now I know better. Before the next story begins, if this is your first time with us, consider subscribing to our channel and turning on the notification bell so you don't miss future scary stories. Your support helps us keep sharing them, so please pass them along to your friends and family as well. Thank you. The hospital at night was too quiet. I was an orderly on the late shift, and the hours seemed to stretch forever. Endless white walls, the faint hum of fluorescent lights, the distant beeps of machines. It all blended into a low, unsettling drone once the sun went down. My only real refuge was the basement office, a small, dim room where I spent most of my shift when things were slow. The problem was, it sat right next to the morgue. I tried not to think too hard about the metal drawers and what lay behind them. It was around midnight, maybe a little after. Another orderly and I were in the office, half-heartedly chatting, glancing at the clock, wishing the night away. The smell of disinfectant hung thick in the air, seeping into our clothes and lungs. The overhead light buzzed softly. Then we heard footsteps in the hallway, slow, measured steps. Not the hurried clip of a nurse or the confident stride of a doctor. Both of us turned toward the open doorway. A man walked past, glancing in as he went by. Something about the way he looked at us made my skin crawl, shifty, off, like he was sizing us up. He didn't speak, just kept walking. A minute later he reappeared. This time he stopped in the doorway. Up close he looked even stranger. His skin was very pale, almost sallow, and his eyes were wide and tired like he hadn't slept in days. His clothes were clean but odd, out of style, like he'd stepped out of an old photograph. He didn't look like hospital staff. He didn't look like a visitor either. "Do you have access to the morgue?" he asked. His voice was low and rasping. I exchanged a look with the other orderly. We both assumed he was there on business for a funeral home. It wasn't unheard of, though the timing was weird. "Yes," I said carefully. "Why?" He didn't give a name, didn't mention a pickup. He just stared at us, his gaze a little too intense. Then he said, "I'll pay you to let me in, just for an hour. I need to be alone with the bodies." The words hit like a physical blow. The air in the room seemed to thicken. My stomach turned. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the other orderly's expression mirror my own disbelief. The man didn't seem aware of how disturbing his request was. His eyes were fixed on us, almost desperate, like he was afraid we'd say no. Everything inside me screamed that this was wrong, beyond wrong. "We can't do that," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "It's against hospital policy." His face darkened. For a second I thought he might argue or try to reach into his coat for something. His jaw clenched, a small twitch running through the muscles of his face. He stared at us, silent, his eyes cold. Finally he turned away and walked down the hall, his footsteps echoing on the tiles. We sat there for a few beats, stunned. It was like the room had been holding its breath and suddenly let it out. "We should tell security," I said at last. The other orderly nodded immediately. We left the office and headed upstairs. The hospital felt even more ominous now, empty corridors, long shadows, flickering light. It was as if the building itself had heard what he'd asked for. At the security office, we found the guard on duty and told him everything. As soon as we described the man, his expression changed. "Did he say anything about wanting to be alone in the morgue?" the guard asked quietly. "Yes," I said, anxiety tightening in my chest. The guard sighed heavily and shook his head. "He's tried this before," he said. "We've had a couple of run-ins with him over the past few months. He always slips away before we can grab him, but it's clear he's up to something." My mind stumbled over the implications. What kind of person makes a habit of trying to get alone with the dead? The guard promised they'd increase patrols and keep an eye out. We headed back down, but nothing felt the same. The basement, the morgue next door, even the familiar hum of the lights, all of it suddenly felt like part of a nightmare we'd barely stepped away from. For the rest of my shift, I couldn't stop thinking about the man's pale face, his wide eyes, and the quiet urgency in his voice when he'd made his request. The words repeated in my head like a broken record. I never saw him again. But every time I passed the morgue after that, a chill ran through me, and I remembered how close we'd come to opening that door for him, to letting something twisted step over a line that should never be crossed. In 2019, when I was 13, my dad took me hunting in the Pine Barrens. We'd been there before, but this time everything felt different, darker. The trees seemed to crowd closer together, their branches knitting overhead like they were trying to trap us. The air was damp and heavy with the smell of wet leaves and pine needles. It was so quiet even the wind seemed muted. We arrived just before sunset and set up near the edge of the forest. Dad always said night was the best time to hunt, more animal activity. I believed him. I trusted him. But as the sun slid behind the trees and shadows pooled between the trunks, a tight unease twisted in my stomach. We walked deeper into the woods, leaves crunching softly under our boots. Dad carried his rifle. I hugged the smaller one he'd given me for my birthday. I could feel the cool metal through my gloves. The trees grew denser, blocking out the moonlight. Soon, our flashlights were the only light we had. We'd stop now and then to listen, but the usual forest sounds were missing. No rustling, no snapping twigs, no distant animal calls. The woods felt dead. After about an hour, my legs ached and my eyelids felt heavy. Dad noticed and suggested we rest. We found a small clearing and sat on a fallen log. The silence pressed in until I could hear my own heartbeat. Dad whispered something about waiting for the right time, but his voice seemed far away. Then we heard it. A low growl, deep and guttural, rolled through the trees. It wasn't the sound of any animal I'd ever heard. It sounded like it came from something big, very big. My heart thundered. I looked at Dad. His face was rigid, his eyes locked straight ahead. Slowly he reached for his rifle and motioned for me to grab mine. The growl came again, closer this time. It echoed through the dark woods, making the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. I clenched the rifle, my hands shaking. Dad rose to his feet, scanning the trees. I could see fear flicker in his eyes, and that terrified me more than the sound itself. From the shadows, a shape emerged. It was tall, much taller than any animal I'd seen in the Pine Barrens. Its body was hunched, its outline wrong somehow. Its eyes glowed faintly in the dark, twin points of pale light. It looked like a wolf, but massively outsized and twisted, as though it didn't belong to this world. Its growl deepened into a loud, aggressive rumble. I could see its breath in the cold air, see its teeth catch the weak beam of our flashlights. "Stay still," Dad whispered. My legs felt like they might buckle. The creature stepped closer, its growl turning into a snarl. Its yellowish eyes locked on us. Dad raised his rifle but didn't fire. I think we both knew a shot wouldn't save us if it decided to attack. It began to circle, sliding in and out of the shadows. Every time I thought it had slipped back into the forest, it reappeared, its eyes glowing from another angle. It was playing with us. My chest hurt from holding my breath. I felt completely exposed, surrounded by darkness and this impossible thing. Then it threw back its head and let out a howl. The sound was so loud it seemed to shake the trees. It cut through me, through everything. Dad grabbed my arm and yanked me to my feet. We ran. Branches whipped my face and arms as we crashed through the underbrush. I heard Dad right behind me, the creature's snarls echoing through the woods. My lungs burned, my legs screamed, but I didn't stop. We weren't following any path. We just ran, blind, desperate to put distance between us and that thing. The deeper we went, the more disoriented we became. Every direction looked the same, just endless trees and shadow. At some point, we stumbled to a stop, gasping. Dad leaned against a trunk, his skin slick with sweat. The growling had stopped, but the silence that followed was worse somehow. It felt like the creature had simply melted into the forest, watching and waiting. "We need to keep moving," Dad said hoarsely, but neither of us knew where to go. We wandered for what felt like hours, searching for any sign of a trail. Every sound made me jump. Every dark gap between trees looked like a hiding place for those glowing eyes. My flashlight beam grew weaker, the battery draining, and the thought of being plunged into total blackness nearly sent me into a panic. Then, finally, we stumbled onto a narrow path, half overgrown. I recognized it from earlier. Relief washed over us. We followed it, barely daring to hope, until the shape of our truck appeared through the trees. When we reached it, it felt like crossing into another world. I climbed into the passenger seat, my hands still trembling. Dad started the engine and we drove away, the dark pines of the Pine Barrens receding in the rearview mirror. We didn't talk on the drive home. I don't know what we saw that night. I only know I'll never go back there again. And sometimes, when I think about those woods, I'm certain that whatever lives in them is still there, waiting. I've been working the night shift at this gas station for about a year. It sat on the edge of town, far enough out that we didn't get much traffic after midnight. Most nights it was just me behind the counter, a few late customers, and the clock crawling toward dawn. The night it happened felt like any other. It was around 2:30 a.m. and my shift was winding down. The store was empty. Outside, the lights cast long shadows over the mostly deserted lot. Inside, the low hum of the air conditioning filled the silence. I was counting the cash from the register, like my manager always reminded me to do carefully, especially at night. "You never know who might come through that door," she used to say. I'd always brushed that off as paranoia. I just finished the last stack of bills when the front door slammed open. The sound cracked through the quiet so loud I almost jumped out of my chair. A man stormed in. He looked rough, dirty clothes, wild eyes, and a sour smell clung to him like he hadn't showered in days. He said nothing. His gaze locked on the money in my hands. For a heartbeat, everything slowed. I knew I should move, shout, do something. Instead, I froze. He lunged. In a blur, he was across the counter, snatching the cash from my grip. 1 second it was in my hands. The next, he was halfway to the door. My brain finally caught up. I bolted from behind the counter and ran after him, shouting for him to stop. Fear might have been there somewhere, but the adrenaline drowned it out. He wasn't fast. He staggered as he hit the parking lot, unsteady on his feet, like his body wasn't listening to his brain. Drugs, I thought. I saw the cash poking out of his jacket pocket as he tried to run. "Stop right there," I yelled. He glanced back, panic flashing across his face, and tried to pick up speed. His legs didn't cooperate. I closed the distance and grabbed his arm. We struggled, grappling for a few seconds. He jerked and twisted, finally breaking free, and lurched forward again. But he still wasn't moving well. My heart hammered, but I wasn't letting him vanish into the dark. I backed off a little, pulled out my phone with shaking hands, and dialed 911 as I kept him in sight. I told the operator where I was, what had happened, what he looked like. They said officers were on the way. I followed at a distance, not wanting to corner him. A desperate man can be dangerous. He didn't seem to realize I was still behind him. He stumbled, kept looking over his shoulder in the wrong direction. His pace slowed further. After a few minutes that felt like much longer, the faint wail of sirens cut through the night. He heard them too. He stopped dead, shoulders tense. I stayed where I was, watching. Police cruisers swung into the lot, lights flashing. 2 officers stepped out, guns drawn, and shouted for him to get on the ground. He hesitated, then sank to his knees and laced his hands behind his head. They cuffed him and walked him to the car. One of the officers came over to me, asking what happened. I answered as best I could, still breathless and shaky. They searched the man and found the cash stuffed in his jacket. The officer told me he was homeless, likely high, and desperate enough to grab whatever he could. Watching them put him in the back of the squad car, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Part of me was angry, part relieved, and part sorry for him. Life had clearly chewed him up, but he'd also made a choice that could have gotten someone hurt, me or the next person. The officers thanked me, said I'd done the right thing calling them, though they gently pointed out that chasing him wasn't exactly safe. After they left, I went back inside. The store felt different. The door, the counter, even the humming fridges along the back wall, they all looked the same, but the sense of easy routine was gone. My hands wouldn't stop trembling. I kept glancing at the entrance, half expecting someone else to burst in. The rest of the night passed quietly, but the quiet felt heavier than usual. When my shift finally ended, I locked up and walked to my car, the parking lot suddenly seeming much larger and emptier. As I drove home, I couldn't stop thinking about how close things had come to going another way. A different man, a different choice, a weapon instead of empty hands, and that night could have been so much worse. The road wound like a dark ribbon through the forest, our headlights carving a narrow path ahead as we drove. It was supposed to be a fun weekend. Me, Devin, and our friends Bethany and Seth on a camping trip to escape a brutal college semester. We'd packed tents and snacks and were already talking about roasting marshmallows and telling ghost stories around the fire. That's all it was meant to be. Simple, fun, harmless. But something about that drive felt wrong. The trees loomed close to the road, their branches tangling overhead. The moon barely pierced the canopy and shadows slid across the pavement, long and strange. I told myself it was just my imagination, nerves mixed with excitement. We were laughing, singing along to the radio when the road suddenly curved sharply. Devin, who was driving, tried to swerve. The tires lost grip on the wet asphalt. The car spun, the world tilting in a blur of headlights and trees. I heard Bethany scream. Metal crunched, glass shattered, and then nothing. When I opened my eyes, I was outside the car. We all were. The car was crumpled against a tree, the hood smashed in, steam hissing from the engine. The night felt muffled, like sound had been wrapped in cotton. Bethany stood beside me, her face chalk white. Seth was on the other side, staring at the wreck. "Is everyone okay?" I asked. My voice sounded flat, distant. Bethany nodded but didn't look at me. Seth didn't answer, he just kept staring. I followed his gaze. Inside the car, strapped into our seats, were our bodies. I saw myself in the passenger seat, slumped forward, blood trickling down my forehead. Devin still clung to the steering wheel, his face contorted in pain. Bethany and Seth were crumpled in the back, their faces pale and still. "But we're right here," Bethany whispered behind me. I reached out to touch the car, needing something solid. My hand passed through the metal like it was smoke. Panic surged up, choking me. "Are we dead?" Seth asked, his voice barely more than a breath. I couldn't bring myself to answer. How else could this make sense? We were standing outside the car, outside our own bodies, unable to touch anything. The forest around us felt wrong, darker, heavier. The trees seemed to lean in, and the air was thick with the sense of being watched. It felt like something unseen had gathered just beyond the reach of the headlights. I tried to walk away from the wreck, but it was like there was an invisible pull holding me near it. Every step away felt thick and sluggish. "We have to get out of here," I said, my voice shaking. "There has to be a way to fix this." But fix what? We were in the middle of nowhere, our bodies broken in the car. No help, no sirens, just us and the trees and this crushing sense that we didn't belong here anymore. Time lost meaning. We stood there staring at ourselves, the night stretching on and on. Every sound in the forest, a rustle, a crack, made my heart race. The shadows between the trees looked almost alive. It felt like the woods were whispering that we were finished, that we were theirs now. After a while, the world started to blur. My head spun, and a heavy, dragging fatigue seeped into me. I heard Bethany crying and saw Seth's terrified face, but they seemed far away, fading. Then everything went black again. When I opened my eyes, I was staring at a ceiling. Bright hospital lights glared above me. The beeping of monitors and the faint hiss of machines filled the air. My whole body felt heavy and numb. I turned my head and saw Devin in the bed next to me, eyes half open, hooked up to wires and tubes. Across the room, Bethany and Seth lay in their own beds, bandaged and bruised but breathing. "We're alive," I whispered. A nurse came in, smiling gently as she checked our vitals. "You all had a bad accident," she said, "but you're going to be okay. You've been unconscious for a couple of days, but you're out of danger now." Her words washed over me but didn't quite settle. I met Bethany's eyes. She stared back, wide and shaken. Seth's face was pale, but there was relief in his expression. The memory of standing outside the wreck, seeing my own body, felt too real to dismiss as a simple hallucination. It hadn't felt like a dream. It had felt like being trapped in a place between one breath and the next, between holding on and letting go. Maybe it was just our minds reacting to trauma. Maybe it was something else. As the nurse bustled around us, I felt a shiver run through me. We were alive. We'd been pulled back. The nightmare was over. At least that's what I tried to tell myself. After a long, brutal shift delivering pizzas during a heat wave, all I wanted was to make my last drop-off and go home. My shirt clung to my back, my hair was damp, and my legs felt like rubber. Even though the sun had gone down, the heat still sat over the city like a heavy blanket. My throat was dry, my head throbbed, and worst of all, I really needed a bathroom. I checked the address as I pulled up. The house was dark, no porch light, no glow from inside. It looked like no one had lived there in years. The windows were grimy, paint peeled off in long strips, and the lawn was a tangle of tall grass. I parked, grabbed the pizza, and stepped out, hoping this would be quick. But the silence around the house set my teeth on edge. No distant cars, no insects, no wind in the trees. Just me and that dead-looking building. I rang the doorbell. Nothing. I waited, then rang again, still no answer. I pulled out my phone and called the number attached to the order. After a few rings, a woman answered. She sounded out of breath, nervous. "I'm so sorry," she said. "I'm on my way. Please just wait a few minutes." Her voice wavered like she was trying not to cry. Something about it made the back of my neck prickle. "Okay," I said. "I'll wait." But my bladder had other plans. I looked around for any sign of life. There were no neighbors outside, no lights on in nearby houses. Just that overgrown yard and a thick, leafy bush near the front of the house. It was dark enough to give me some privacy. I hesitated, then hurried over, glancing around one last time. Relief washed through me as I unzipped and finally let go, tension draining out of my body. Then the bush moved. I heard a rustle right in front of me. My heart seized. I stumbled back, fumbling with my zipper. In the dim light, I saw him. A man crouched low in the shrubbery, his face hidden by leaves and shadow. I had just peed on someone. He exploded out of the bush, sprinting away so fast it took me a second to understand what I was seeing. He didn't look back, just ran full tilt down the street and disappeared into the dark. I stood there, stunned, my pulse racing. Who hides in a bush outside a dark, seemingly abandoned house? Something caught the light at my feet. A small bag lay half buried in the leaves where he'd been hiding. I picked it up with shaking hands. It was a worn backpack. I opened it. Inside was a roll of duct tape, a serrated knife, a length of rope. My stomach lurched. This wasn't a random homeless guy or harmless prankster. This was a kit, a plan. Someone had been waiting here for someone else. My mind jumped instantly to the woman on the phone, the customer who was on her way. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. My voice shook as I told the operator what had happened. The house, the hidden man, the bag, the waiting woman. They said officers were on their way. I paced the yard, scanning the shadows, the prickling sense that he might come back, making it hard to stand still. Then I saw her. A woman hurried down the street, looking over her shoulder every few steps. When she saw me, she broke into a run. "You have to help me," she gasped when she reached me, eyes wide with panic. "He's after me, my ex. He's dangerous." I didn't need more explanation. "Get in the car," I said, guiding her toward my vehicle. "We'll wait for the police there." She nodded, tears streaking down her face. Once we were inside, I locked the doors and kept my eyes on the dark street, imagining that man stepping into view at any second. Minutes dragged by, but finally the glow of approaching sirens washed over the houses. Police cars pulled up, lights flashing. I waved them over, explaining as quickly as I could. They searched the area, but the man was gone. All that remained was the backpack I'd found. The woman told them about her ex, about threats and fear, and how she'd come here thinking it was far enough out of the way to be safe. The officers took her statement, promising they'd look for him, do what they could. Watching her sit in the back of the patrol car afterward, shaken but alive, I realized just how close she'd come to something unspeakable, and how strangely everything had lined up, that I'd been sent to this address at this time, desperate enough to use the bushes where he happened to be hiding. On the drive home, the image of him exploding out of the shrubbery replayed in my mind, over and over. So did the feel of that backpack in my hands, canvas rough against my fingers, the cold metal of the knife. I knew one thing for certain. If I hadn't been there, if I hadn't stopped under that bush at that exact moment, that night would have ended very differently for her. A few years ago, my best friend Kevin and I decided to explore an old abandoned house on the edge of our town. We'd heard all the rumors that it was haunted, cursed, home to ghosts or worse. We didn't believe any of it. We were bored and wanted a thrill. We got more than we bargained for. The house sat alone on a hill, far from any other buildings. Cracked walls, shattered windows, parts of the roof caved in. Vines crawled up the sides like nature was slowly eating it whole. As we walked up the path, a tight discomfort settled in my chest. Kevin, always braver, or at least better at pretending, led the way. "We'll just go in, look around, and leave," he said, trying to sound casual. I nodded, even as the air around the place felt colder and heavier, like the house was sucking the warmth out of the world. I forced myself through the broken gate after him. The front door hung crooked on its hinges. It let out a long creak when we pushed it open. Inside, it was dim and smelled of dust and rot. Dirt coated the floor. Broken furniture lay scattered, collapsed where it had fallen years before. The silence pressed in, broken only by the faint sigh of wind slipping through cracks in the walls. Kevin wandered forward, inspecting old chairs, running his fingers along peeling wallpaper. I stayed close, my eyes scanning corners and doorways. That feeling of being watched grew stronger with every step. We moved deeper into the house. The farther we went, the more wrong everything felt. The light seemed not to reach certain corners. My heartbeat was loud in my ears. We came to a narrow staircase leading to the second floor. "Let's check upstairs," Kevin said, grinning. I hesitated. "Maybe we should just look around down here," I suggested, trying to keep my tone neutral. But he was already halfway up the stairs. I muttered a curse under my breath and followed, gripping the rail. The old wood groaned under our weight. The second floor was darker. Most of the windows were boarded up or coated in grime. The air was colder, too, and thick with a foul, rotten smell that made my stomach churn. We walked down a long hallway. My skin crawled. I wanted to suggest we leave, but before I could open my mouth, we heard it. A low, deep growl. It rumbled through the hallway, vibrating the air. Kevin stopped dead. My blood turned to ice. The sound came from behind a closed door at the far end of the hall. It didn't sound like any animal I knew. It sounded wrong. Too deep, too full of something hateful. "We need to go," I whispered. My voice shook. Kevin, stubborn as always, started toward the door. "It's probably just the wind," he said, but I could hear the doubt creeping into his words. As he reached for the handle, the growl intensified, louder, more menacing. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. Every part of me screamed to run, but I couldn't move. He pushed the door open. The room beyond was dark, but we could see one corner. Something was there. A shadowy figure crouched in the gloom, shape vaguely human but twisted. Its outline was wrong, like its limbs bent in the wrong places. Two faintly glowing eyes stared out at us from the darkness. The growling stopped. Silence fell heavy and suffocating. Then it spoke. "Leave," it said in a voice that scraped along my nerves. or never leave again. The words hung in the air like a curse. We didn't wait to see more. Without a word, both of us spun and bolted down the hall. The house seemed to wake around us, walls creaking, floorboards groaning, as if something massive was moving just out of sight. We stumbled down the stairs, nearly falling, and sprinted through the front door. The air outside felt thick, like it was trying to drag us back, but we kept going, tearing through the broken gate and across the field. Only once we were far away did we stop, bent over, gasping for breath. We turned to look back. The house sat on the hill, silent and still, just as it had before. From a distance it looked like any other abandoned building, but we knew better. We never talked about that day afterward. Not really. But the memory stayed with me. The glowing eyes, the voice, the feeling that we'd brushed up against something that wasn't meant to be seen. Leave or never leave again. I don't know what we encountered in that house. I don't want to know. All I know is that we listened. I never went back up that hill. And I'm not sure anyone who ignores that warning would be as lucky as we were.